What role does Hermes Mercurius, the thrice great sage, prophet, and king, play in the Picatrix? He's certainly not the only sage discussed in the Picatrix, or really even the main one, if there could even be said to be a central figure in the book. There he sits, enshrined among the greats, alongside Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and Empedocles, or better yet, pseudo-Plato, pseudo-Aristotle, pseudo-Pythagoras, and pseudo-Empedocles. But what we find is that the Hermes Mercurius of the Picatrix is an amalgam from many different sources, and these are not the sources you'd probably expect, namely, works drawn from the Corpus Hermeticum, like the Poimandres or the Asclepius. Instead, what we will see is that the Hermes Mercurius quoted in the Picatrix is most often a teacher of practical magic, not of ancient gnosis and theological mysteries, the likes of which are discussed throughout the many tractates of the Greek Corpus Hermeticum. This is Hermes Mercurius with an aspect toward the practical hermetica exclusively, not the theoretical. This is the Hermes of the medieval Arabic world from the 8th to the 10th century, not of ancient Egypt from the 3rd century BC to the 3rd century AD. Now, that isn't to say that these are supposed to be reckoned as conceptually different figures, but simply that when Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus speaks in the Picatrix, it's not through citations of ancient Egyptian or Greco-Egyptian texts and doctrines. Of course, these different aspects of Hermes, the practical Hermes of, say, the pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica versus the theological Hermes of the ancient Corpus Hermeticum, these were eventually reconnected during the Renaissance by Marsilio Ficino and later thinkers, but if we approach the Picatrix and the texts that comprise it in isolation from events that came well after its composition and translation, we can pick up on some of the differences that arose throughout the centuries concerning this figure. The Greek name Hermes appears 13 times in the Latin Picatrix, and only once with the title Trismegistus added on. The Latin name Mercurius occurs far more times, but sometimes it's referring to the planet Mercury, and not the sage Mercurius, though this distinction is quite easily determined from context. I'll present these two figures distinctly, though I think it's safe to say the author and/or translator of the Picatrix considered them to be the same figure, albeit rooted in different sources. When the name Hermes appears in the Picatrix, often it's linked to his work De Imaginibus, or On Images, especially in passages that have to do with healing renal stones. Alternatively, you'll find the name Hermes associated with the pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetic work, the Liber as Timaeus, or more appropriately, the Kitab al-Istimakis. So, just to be safe, let's deal with Mercurius first. Our first encounter with Mercurius is in Book 2, Chapter 10, Section 10, which is a section on astrological images. That is to say, magical images you're supposed to pair up with electional astrology in order to create talismans. The section opens with, quote, "These are the figures of the planets as we have found them translated in the Lapidary of Mercurius, the Book of Apollonius, and in the Book of Spirits and Images, which the wise Picatrix translated." A list of images follows, with entries according to different authors, including the opinion of the wise Mercurius, which relates to images of Saturn. An old man sitting upright on a tall throne, and a man standing with his hands above his head and holding a fish. Below his feet is a lizard. These you can contrast with the opinion of other sages who state that the image of Saturn is the shape of a man standing on a dragon, holding a scythe in his right hand and a spear in his left, dressed in black and tawny clothes. There are other planetary images, according to Mercurius, in this section as well. For example, the image of Jupiter, according to the opinion of Mercurius, is the shape of a man covered in a single linen cloth, riding upon a dragon, holding a lance or a dart in his hand. The image of Mars, according to the opinion of Mercurius, is the shape of a naked man standing upright on his feet, holding on his right a beautiful virgin standing on her feet, which is an image of Venus with her hair fastened back. Mars is placing his right hand on his own neck and his left hand extending above her chest. He is facing her and admiring her. The sage says that this figure has great power, and indeed, great effects. And so on with the other planets. There is also the Mercurius from the Book of the Seven Planets. This is a book containing the images of the planets which Mercurius sent to Alexander the Great. Its image of Saturn is the shape of a black man wrapped in a green cloak, with a dog-like head and a sickle in his hand. Its image of Jupiter is the shape of a man dressed in the finest clothes, sitting upon a throne. In this way, Mercurius serves as a kind of vizier or advisor, like Aristotle, to Alexander the Great, specifically on astromagical correspondences and how to perform rituals and operations. For example, Mercurius warned Alexander that when he wished to do something with any of the planets, he should work with a body congruent in nature to the planet itself. If you wish to accomplish anything, consider the nature of the ascendant at the time you wish to operate, and dress yourself in clothes suited to the rising sign. Make the ascendant itself fortunate by the fortunate planets, and make the seventh house unfortunate by the unfortunate planets, since the ascendant pertains to the querent. Therefore, it must deservingly be fortunate so that it may progress more forcefully. The seventh house, however, is attributed to the thing desired. Therefore, it must appropriately be unfortunate, so that by its weakness it may be set out more gently toward the effect. Here follow the colors of the clothes or vestments of the planets. The color of Saturn's vestments is all black, and best made of wool. The color of Jupiter is green and best made of silk. The color of Mars is like the flame of a fire and best made of silk. The color of the Sun is golden yellow and best made of silk or golden yellow. The color of Venus is like pink and best made of silk. The color of Mercury is a mixture of many colors and best made of silk. The color of the moon's garment is shining white, and silk or linen is most preferable. Now let us discuss the suffumigations of the planets. The suffumigation of Saturn comprises all foul-smelling things, like asafoetida, gum, bdellium, hemlock, and the like. The suffumigation of Jupiter comprises all good and balanced scents, such as amber, aloe wood, and the like. The suffumigation of Mars comprises everything hot, like pepper and ginger. The suffumigation of the Sun comprises all things with a balanced and good scent, like musk, amber, and similar things. The suffumigation of Venus comprises everything that smells balanced, like the rose, the violet, the green myrtle, and the likes. The suffumigation of Mercury comprises everything with composite odors, such as narcissus, violets, myrtle, and similar things. The suffumigation of the Moon comprises all the cold scents, like camphor, lily, and so on. Heed all these things in your rituals. End quote. Mercurius also provides the colors or pigments and tinctures for each of the faces of the signs. So for example, the color of the first face of Aries is red and made thus. Take 1 part each of green gall, gum, and orpiment. Grind them up separately, then mix them together. When you desire to write or paint anything with it, combine it with egg whites, The color of the second face is yellow of a golden hue, and is made thus. Take equal parts of blue vitriol and talc. Grind them up separately, and mix them with honey. Distill this into a little gum, and set it aside for the ritual. The tincture of the third face is white, and is made thus. Take equal parts of white lead and talc. The first face of Taurus is a tawny and smoky color, and it is made thus. Take soot and mix it with gum, and keep it for use. The second face is white, which is composed thus. Take equal parts of white lead and talc, and keep it for use. The third face is black and is made from burnt wool. The first face of Gemini is a yellow color similar to gold in hue, and it is composed thus. Crush up gall and take the black parts that are inside. Soften these in water, but only in enough to cover them. In another container of water, do the same thing with lac resin. Then mix these two liquids with a little gum, and keep the mixture for use. The second face of Gemini is red, and it is made thus. Take some arsenic and cinnabar, mix them together, distill them, and add a sufficient amount of gum, then set it aside for use. The third face is red, and it is made as we have said above, and so on for all the faces of all 12 signs of the zodiac. So again, these passages are technically hermetic, but quite different from the kinds of material we've grown used to reading about in the Corpus Hermeticum. The Picatrix goes on to give the 45 aphorisms from the Secret of Secrets, which is something of a generic term in Arabic for a book of magic. In the interest of time, I can't read all 45 aphorisms, but I can give you a taste of what is written. Notice, however, that this Mercurius is labeled with the title The Sage of Babylon, not of Ancient Egypt, which is quite strange. The passage on images and theories that greatly improve this science is as follows. Everything recited so far in our book was extracted from the sayings of the ancient sages and their books concerning that science and craft. Whoever reads this book, examines it perfectly, and understands the things we have said so far, will understand and thoroughly recognize the effort we invested in compiling sayings from a variety of books on that body of knowledge that are the bases of these rituals. We have discovered one complete volume of those books composed by Mercurius, the Sage of Babylon. In it there was a book of aphorisms called The Secret of Secrets. From it, we have selected 45 aphorisms reckoned to be quite useful in this science and craft. 1. If you work from things pertinent to a planet, and use these things liberally, and the nature of your ritual is also pertinent to the nature of that planet, then truly you will have the greatest assistance in attracting the fortitude, power, and potency of that planet. 2. Entreat the sun that you may be feared and have glory, the leadership of armies, a splendid heart, the rule of nobles, the destruction of kings, the lighting of fire, and the power to bring light into darkness. 3. Entreat the moon for agility of movement, the flow of waters, the power of revealing secrets, the extinguishing of fire, the lessening of burdens to be overcome, and the separating of united opinions. 4. Entreat Saturn for delaying movement, concealing purity, destroying cities, humbling hearts, and calming waters. 5. Entreat Jupiter for the accumulation of wealth, the enhancement of dreams, the pleasure of escaping sadness, the leaving behind of toil and quarrel, and safe journeys by land or sea. 6. Entreat Mars for conquering enemies, emboldening hearts, tracking and hunting harmful animals, setting fires, war planning, and conquest over enemies. 7. Entreat Venus for the union of desires, the power of causing joy and friendship, driving out idleness and grief, for invigorating the appetite, augmenting procreation, multiplying sons, extinguishing fires, and remaining secure from animals. 8. Make many suffumigations, maintain perfect belief, fast frequently, utter many prayers, pick worthy places for the ritual, look to the aspects of the planets. These are the fundamentals of magic works. 9. Your request will be easily fulfilled if the planet to which the request is made is the lord of your nativity. If not, it will be difficult to bring your request to its deserved end. 10. The power of the planets lies in the spirits that strengthen effects, that modulate qualities, improving them or lessening and weakening them, and that spread out their powers. 11. If the ascendant differs from the nature of the request, the petition will never be fulfilled, nor will the prayer ever achieve what is sought. The list of aphorisms goes on with more detailed instructions for electional astrology, and again, we can safely say that the writings of Mercurius shared here are purely practical in nature. There's very little said about the nature of reality, of the cosmos, of the mind, of the one and the all, and so on. What we have instead is specific instructions on how to please the spirits of the planets and draw down their favor to effect change in the world. So that's Mercurius. Well, what about Hermes? Well, things aren't much different for entries written in his name. These are also mostly practical magic, particularly the medicinal kind. The following is an image that was used by Arnold of Villanova and was very popular among Jewish doctors in Spain and southern France in the 13th century. Again, this is the only instance in the Latin Picatrix where Hermes is addressed by the full title Hermes Trismegistus, and the passage is as follows. Hermes Trismegistus wrote the book on images for renal stones, wherein he posits that one by one each image is connected to an organ of the human body and formed under the faces of the signs. Take pure gold and make a seal on which you should inscribe the figure of a lion, with the sun being in Leo in the first or second face, and in the ascendant or midheaven, with the moon not in her house, and the lord of the ascendant neither facing Saturn nor Mars, nor receding from them. This seal should be bound on the back or around the kidneys. I have tested that whoever carries it never suffers. So, it's safe to say from this that the Hermes Trismegistus of the Picatrix is not only a king, prophet, and sage, as we'll see in the next passage, but a priestly physician, and that medicine and the alleviation of human suffering played a prominent role in his medieval portfolio. Picatrix then goes on to relate an image for each of the different signs for healing ailments related to their respective organs. So, the Hermes of the Picatrix is not only a king, prophet, sage physician, and astromagician, but also a priest and ritual technician who prescribes a great variety of sacrifices. The Picatrix states, "The sages who made prayers and sacrifices to the planets in their mosques did the above-mentioned things. When the heavens moved by 8 degrees, they made the sacrifice of one animal and while it was setting by 8 degrees, they made another sacrifice. They say that Hermes ordered them to do this in their mosques or in their churches. Those sages have claimed regarding Hermes that he was the lord of 3 thriving roles, namely a king, a prophet, and a sage. They mandated that no sacrifices of any animal that is bicolored, black, with a broken bone, with a broken horn, with a sick eye, or with a blemish on its body be made in their mosques. While they were decapitating that animal, they would take out its liver right away. They examined it, and if they found any defect or stain on it, then they would claim that the lord of that place had a notable impediment. Then they would hash up this liver and give it to everyone present so that they might eat it. So this stands in stark contrast to the Hermes of the Latin Asclepius, written sometime around the 2nd or 3rd centuries AD. In that text, which was widely cited in antiquity, especially among the North African church fathers like Augustine and Lactantius, Hermes actually chastises his disciples Asclepius and Tat for suggesting to him that his prayers should be enjoined with sacrifices of incense and other substances. Quote, "Upon hearing Asclepius, Trismegistus replied to them in alarm. 'A better omen, Asclepius, give me a better omen. For when you pray to God, it is practically blasphemy to burn incense and the like. For he lacks nothing who is himself all things, or in whom are all things. But let us worship by giving thanks, for these are the greatest burnt offerings to God, when mortals give thanks.'" After this, they go off and share a ritual meal, which is explicitly mentioned as being a vegetarian meal. As you can see, this is quite the departure from what's recommended by the later Hermes. This, of course, isn't to suggest that they aren't conceptually the same person, but that when you have all kinds of wise men across history pseudepigraphically attributing their work to Hermes, you're going to get contradictory messages. In any case, it's not like the Corpus Hermeticum itself isn't also filled with contradictory concepts, since it was never intended to be assembled together as one theologically coherent collection of texts. It's just important to be aware of some of the diversity in the tradition and not to be too dogmatic about certain points of doctrine which are inconclusive. Now contrast this epilogue from the Asclepius with the following passage from the Picatrix. "The ancient sages say that the first sacrifice pertaining to Saturn is made while he is in Taurus, and they sacrifice a single cow to him. They claim that its horns are set as a crown, and that it is more beautiful and more suited for sacrifice than the other animals. They used to make this sacrifice once they had fattened up the cow by feeding it herbs gathered by virgin girls at sunrise. They would return home by paths other than the ones they used when they left home. Those ancient sages hold all the above as the greatest secret in their works. They would be attentive that this cow be totally unblemished, entirely lacking white spots, no matter how insignificant. Over its eyes was placed a golden chain twirled round its horns. They say that the wise Hermes taught a ritual of this kind. When they wanted to decapitate it, however, they would prepare it for funerary rites and suffumigate it with the suffumigations of Saturn. They spoke in the manner of the Greeks. The priest decapitated it with a sharp sword on which there was to be found no tarnish or defect. Then he collected its blood in a dish. He then retrieved its tongue, ears, snout, and eyes, and the rest took their share. Afterwards, they would inspect the blood sitting in the saucer and the froth rising from it. From that froth, they understood the dominion and motion of Saturn, which, according to them, is the first motion, because in him, motion begins and ends. They used to make this kind of sacrifice when Saturn entered the sign of Taurus. So much for Hermes' rebuke of Asclepius for wanting to include incense and sacrifices for his prayers. Here in the Picatrix, Hermes is recommending a good old-fashioned communal pagan barbecue, followed up with a kind of haruspice or divination ritual involving the inspection of blood in a bowl instead of the more traditional reading of entrails. Moving on in Book 3, we encounter some more excerpts of the pseudo-Aristotelian Hermetica, specifically the Liber Metadeitos in the Latin. I would relate some of these operations, but they would probably get my channel taken down for violating all kinds of rules, so you can go check these out yourself, but it suffices to say that this is a section on how to create deadly or somniferous poisons using a bunch of rare and unsavory human, animal, and plant ingredients. These 10 mixtures, the text states, have qualities and powers from the planets and the fixed stars, along with the qualities of the things from which they were composed. Out from this mixture emerges a single spiritual power. These things are found in a book that is called Heidetos, that is the Kitab al-Haditus, compiled by the wise Hermes. Moreover, in this particular work, Hermes relates a kind of mixture for performing miracles and lifting all curses from people, namely those who carry this mixture on themselves. Now, immediately following this section, in section 54, there's a passage called Miracles that Arise from the Properties of Humankind, which is all about wondrous or miraculous mixtures made from the parts of the human body. Since this includes the sort of operations that would also get this presentation taken down by the powers that be for promoting the consumption of your fellow man along with other illicit substances for divinatory purposes, I'll leave this one for you to check out yourself. The last appearance of Hermes that I wanted to discuss was the story of Adocenton, one of the more famous episodes from the Picatrix, thanks to the inclusion of a discussion about it in Dame Frances Yates's Giordano Bruno and the Hermetic Tradition as a kind of magical utopia. Strangely enough, the passage is about a city in Egypt, but it is related by the Chaldeans, those people discussed by Ibn Washia's Chaldean or Nabatean agriculture, and it goes as follows. The Chaldeans who initiated themselves into this work and science are the Magi. These men are considered most competent in this science. The Magi claim that Hermes was the first to build a kind of house of statues. With these statues, he would measure the length of the Nile all the way to the mountain of the moon. Here, he built the house of the sun. Moreover, he occulted himself from humankind, such that none in his presence could see him. It was Hermes indeed who built the eastern city of Egypt, 12 miles long, wherein he erected a tower with 4 gates on its 4 sides. At the eastern gate, he placed the statue of an eagle. On the western gate, that of a bull. On the southern gate, that of a lion, and on the northern one, that of a dog. Hermes called loud-voiced spiritual entities to enter them. Nobody could enter that tower's gates without the entity's permission. There, he also planted certain kinds of trees, in the middle of which stood a great tree that bore every type of fruit. At the summit of that tower, he built a kind of turret 30 cubits in height, on the top of which he placed a round orb, whose color would change according to each of the 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, however, the cycle began anew. Every day, that city was covered by the color of that orb, and thus it glowed differently each day. Around the turret, there was abundant water where plenty of fish dwelt. He set up various statues of every kind around the city, and by their power, the inhabitants were made virtuous, free from sin, and wicked idleness. This city was called Arasentin. These people had been taught in the knowledge of the ancients, their depths and secrets, along with the science of astronomy. Now, this name, Arasentin, is simply a corrupt transliteration of Al-Ashmunain, which is the Arabic name for the city of Hermopolis in Egypt, dedicated to Thoth Hermes. The infusion of spirits into statues was a well-established practice in the Hermetic tradition, featuring prominently in the Latin Asclepius. You can also find some information about this phenomenon in Porphyry's work on statues or on images. This is the passage that really emphasizes Hermes' triple role as sage, prophet, and king. He works wonders such as turning invisible, animating statues, and multigrafting trees. He brings law to his people that makes them virtuous and free from sin. And he rules over his city from his place of hiding. So this passage too gives us a window into better understanding the Hermes of the Picatrix. He's not only a sage who relates magical operations, but also even a kind of civilizing culture hero. Another ritual which I will pass over here in concluding relates to the ritual of perfect nature, taken from the Kitab al-Istimachis, or in its Latin transliteration, the Book of Astimehek. I've already dealt with this ritual elsewhere, so in the interest of time, I will not discuss it again here, even though it is an extremely important point of emphasis in the work overall. The ritual of perfect nature is somewhat reminiscent of the vision in the Poimandres, the first work in the Corpus Hermeticum, when the mind of Ra becomes manifest to Hermes in a vision. Other than these episodes I've listed, that's it. That's the full extent of Hermes Mercurius in the Picatrix. So then, in conclusion, now that we've examined all the appearances of Hermes Mercurius, I think we're now better situated to ask ourselves the age-old question, is the Picatrix really hermetic? As always, I will leave this up to you to decide. Following the threefold breakdown I gave a few years ago in my talk, Is the Kabbalion Really Hermetic?, I would have to say that from a nominalist perspective, the Picatrix is most definitely hermetic. Not long ago, I saw some memes floating around the internet with a picture of a Hermes watch that says, "Not everything that bears the name of Hermes is hermetic," and it gave me a good chuckle, but ultimately it's a straw man argument, so I hope nobody took it too seriously. I don't think anybody is claiming that, say, Homer's Odyssey is hermetic because the god Hermes makes an appearance before Odysseus and gives him a magic herb to protect him from Circe's poison. In order for something to be hermetic, you need the name Hermes Trismegistus, and while this full name is explicitly mentioned only once in the Picatrix, as the author of a book on images that cure renal stones, the Mercurius he presents is quite clearly the same sage, prophet, and king, even if the operations he recommends would not be very familiar to a reader of the Corpus Hermeticum. Next, we have the substantialist or essentialist perspective, and I would say it's a lot trickier to say whether the Picatrix is a hermetic work in essence, because it means you would have to define what that essential nature is, and few today can agree on what that is because there are so many conflicting and contradictory texts within the Hermetic tradition, both in theory and in practice. A problem also arises in trying to find common denominators between all the texts attributed to Hermes, because there isn't that much conceptually that cleanly distinguishes or demarcates them from other esoteric texts from similar time periods that pertain either to practical magic or ancient metaphysics. So, I'm not sure if we can say the Picatrix is substantially or essentially hermetic, but this may depend on what your definition of an essentially hermetic text is. Finally, this moves us to the last way in which a text can be hermetic, and that is in the sense of hermetically sealed or kept esoterically for an inner circle of initiates. This is the functionalist approach to the label, and I think we can safely say that the Picatrix is an esoteric text full of injunctions to privacy and secrecy, and it takes on an initiatory character in the way it relates and organizes information. So, insofar as it is a didactic, esoteric work, I believe we're on firm grounds to call the Picatrix functionally hermetic. So, with everything we've examined today, I hope you've come away with a clearer picture of the variety of ways in which Hermes Mercurius Trismegistus has been depicted throughout the Middle Ages. And in terms of whether you think the Picatrix can safely be called hermetic, you tell me. And try to keep in mind the different ways in which this label has been used throughout history. My approach has been to be descriptive and not prescriptive, though I know this approach is not shared by everyone. In closing, I hope that this information was useful to you, and that if you plan on making any use of it, you may use it only in working toward the good. If you'd like to support more work such as this, please visit patreon.com/themodernhermeticist, and above all, thank you for listening.